God gave the land to the Jews. The Jews were here 2,000 years ago, or there, depending on where you're making the argument. The IDF is the most moral army in the world. Those are just some of the arguments that you hear from the pro-Israel side on a daily basis, which, we appreciate because it makes us unique in that we are the best pro-Israel channel out there. But we don't appreciate in the sense that it makes our job much harder, which is to argue why people should actually support Israel and not the savages. That might be a hint as to why people should support Israel. But yeah, this is unfortunately much more prevalent than anything we say on this channel. Today, we will be debunking those most popular of the pro-Israel arguments that are only hurting what is the most important cause right now in the world. Welcome to the reality show. I am joined by Marco, Richard, and Jonathan. Jonathan, what is your favorite bad pro-Israel argument and why? Why is it bad?
There's a lot of them, Razi, and I don't want to would never disagree with you, but we're a pro-Israel channel, but we're also I think even more so a pro-reason channel, pro-reality channel, and to me the worst pro-Israel argument for Israel is probably the one you started off with. Is this notion that somehow Jews have this tribal historic right to the land that is Israel, that simply because they are Jews, they have an occupational, if you will, right based on things that happened thousands and thousands of years ago. Ironically, you often hear that, very frequently from the most religious people, at least I have, tell me, Jews have always been in Israel. This is their birthright, if you will. And that's certainly an argument that we hear very much these days in support of Israel. I don't agree with it, but that's certainly what you hear quite a bit from people making the case why Israel should and needs to exist.
Yeah, you mentioned we're a pro-reason, pro-reality channel, as the name of this show, the reality show, might indicate. Richard, you and Marco named this show the reality show, and I know you had different options. Was any of the names you were thinking of anything like the God-given show or the we're right because we were here 2,000 years ago show?
Or we're right because we're right, and that's the argument. Yeah, no, absolutely not. I mean, I'm not Israeli and I'm not Jewish, and neither is he. And if you've seen us talk on this channel before, any of our back catalogue, you'll see us giving arguments in favour of Israel. But just because I'm neither of those things, and I've never been to Israel, and I don't have any family from Israel, the fact that I've never eaten hummus in Tel Aviv is irrelevant, quite honestly. And the fact, and if someone's argument is, well, I don't care that you're not Jewish, I don't care you're not Israeli, so long as you're on Israel's side, well, that's an equally dodgy argument, because that you do. I might be fickle, I might be your friend today and your enemy tomorrow. So you need to know that I have reasons, and you need to know that those reasons are based on truth
And not tribalism, right? I mean, because isn't that the whole idea? It's like these people make this argument. They're making the same argument that the Arabs are making, that the Palestinians are making. Something happened thousands of years ago to people that I met or never met, had nothing to do with, and that gives me a right to ownership of property here today.
Yeah, yeah. Because we're sitting here in London. Should that be Roman? Should Marco be allowed here because he was born in Italy and I should be kicked out? I mean, all those arguments just shatter as soon as you start applying them all over the place, because it's stupid, quite frankly.
And also, I'll say, I mean, Razi, I don't want to jump on you, but they're also the weakest. Israel isn't a Jewish state the same way that Gaza is an Islamic state. Razi, as you always point out, some 20% of Israelis are actually Arab or of Arab descent, practicing all to there isn't a state-imposed theocratic religion in Israel. So, it is an Israeli state, I suppose, in name, but it's a modern state. It's a first world state. It's a rights-respecting state. That's why I think we should support it and defend it, not necessarily because of historical history of something that happened literally thousands of years ago. That's not what makes it moral or good, in my opinion.
Yeah. If you've seen this channel, you realize we've been talking about Israel a lot. Why am I here talking in favor of Israel? Well, because although Israel is just a specific example of what we call a concrete, it's just the application of the principles behind the way we think about the events occurring right now in Israel. And what's going on, that Israel is, as Jonathan was suggesting, is a modern state funded on the basis of inclusion, on the basis of the protection of individual freedom, which makes it a legitimate state. And therefore, it has the right to exist, given to it by the fact that the state itself is there to protect freedom. And that's why we argue that the other side is not a legitimate option. So the creation of a Palestinian state is not a legitimate option because its point is to curtail freedom based on a religious, spurious basis. And that ultimately what it boils down to. When you start analyzing things just based on not objective fact linked to reality, your way of thinking, your epistemology is totally screwed up, because you start basing concepts on some arbitrary statement. Religion is not a rational way of thinking. It's not even a way of thinking, because religious assumes the revelation. God tells you what to do and what to think. So there's no mind process involved in the first place. Therefore, everything that comes from starting from a religious basis is necessarily bogus and made up. While if you observe and use reality as your compass, you will reach the conclusion, the logical conclusion, that Israel here is the only thing that stands between civilization and savages. And that's why I'm here arguing for it, because it's in my own interest to base the thinking and the analysis of the facts on reality for my own purpose, for my selfish purpose. So Israel effectively is the moral agent here, because it's the only one who's moving towards civilization and the protection of individual rights.
And that's what Rand said. Somebody on the chat, I noticed, said something effective, well, what does this in effect have to do with Ayn Rand? I mean, go back and listen and read what Ayn Rand had to say about conflict in the Middle East 40 plus years ago now. She described the Arabs in that case as savages. That's held true certainly well through October 7th on an ongoing basis, and she denounced them. In fact, Razi, didn't Ms. Rand say that she was sending money in support of Israel? I don't know if it was the Israeli government or the IDF at the time. She was actually donating to the Israeli cause in the 1970s, which she had never done before, to my knowledge.
Yeah, I think she said somewhere this is the only cause she is financially supporting. But yeah, I actually want to address these comments in a second. A couple of things I wanted to address as well. Richard, you said the fact that I've never had hummus in Tel Aviv is irrelevant. It's irrelevant to the argument. It's not irrelevant to your life. Maybe Tel Aviv is not the first place in Israel I'd go, but yeah, hummus is different in Israel, different and better. Thank you, PC, for the super chat. PC says, the Holocaust tells me Jews need a homeland. Yeah, the Holocaust, and if the Holocaust didn't tell you that, the past 9 months should make it very clear. Jews were slaughtered in the most savage way imaginable. And this was live streamed and celebrated immediately around the world. And those who didn't celebrate it immediately celebrated shortly thereafter, or waited a little bit until the Jews started defending themselves, and then started arguing against that. Thank you, Apollo Zeus, for gifting a YouTube membership. And yeah, so just a quick note on these comments. So we had a couple of people in the chat saying, why aren't you talking about objectivism. One of the comments says, you don't even produce objectivist content anymore. We never produced objectivist content. Objectivist content is what Ayn Rand produced in her lifetime. We have produced and continue to produce objectivism-inspired content. We are a political and cultural commentary channel. There is no issue in current politics or culture that is more important than this. There is no issue that is clearer to judge than this. And yet there is no issue where so many people are so clearly on the side of evil, clearly and proudly. So we're covering this because this is what's important right now, and we will continue to do so. I would love to get to I keep saying this. I'd love to get to the day where we do shows laughing about the Guardian telling us to save the planet by not flushing the toilet. But that is not, at the moment, the most important thing to talk about. And yeah, if tomorrow morning I wake up, I look at the news and I see that Israel actually took care of Gaza, took care of Lebanon, we'll do a few shows about how great that is, then a few shows about the protests, and then we'll move on with our lives. Unfortunately, that is not the case. And the savages are still supported and have cheerleaders everywhere.
Can I just say, I feel like the whole Jews need a place to go argument is a pretty weak argument as well. Humans need rational societies to go to. Human beings need reason in order to live. So any countries that can, in my opinion, this is not objective, this is any countries that can embrace some of these ideas, individual rights, respect for different thoughts, religions, etc., they're going to flourish. It just so happens that Israel happens to be the only country in the entire Middle East. The Middle East is a legit cesspool. Where would you ever want to go in the Middle East if you are a modern thinking, rational person? Where don't they throw gay? I'm not happen to be a gay person, but where don't they throw gays off buildings in the Middle East, except for Israel? So, in my mind, Jews need a place to go. Human beings need a place to go that isn't dominated by theocracy, and certainly not Islam. And that's what the Middle East is. And that's one of the reasons why I support Israel, and certainly in this cause.
By the way, I recently found out that in Bahrain, homosexuality isn't technically illegal, but there are ways in which the government punishes people who are gay. So that is, I think, maybe the best you can get in the Middle East outside of Israel. And generally, it's not a good country, regardless of your sexual orientation. We have a couple of things I want to comment on quickly. First of all, Boaz Arad, the president, I don't know the exact title, but the person running the Ayn Rand Center Israel, thank you for the compliment. And there's also Willful Thinker says the channel could have another show concurrently, like one day a week. We do. And that show is not about Israel. That show is behind a paywall, the cheapest paywall. So everybody who contributes monthly gets access to that. But yeah, look, tomorrow we're doing, not tomorrow, Thursday, we're doing a show that's not Israel related. Friday, from time to time, when need be, we will do that. But no, this is the most important issue.
Especially since the defenders of Israel have such terrible, weak arguments. I think that's kind of part of what you were making the argument here today, Razi. When the best you can say is Israel is the most moral country in the world because it calls the terrorists before they drop a bomb on them. They let them know they're coming. If that's their defenders, then they've got pretty weak defenders, and they do.
Yeah, and I'll get to Gigi Ryder's super chat in a minute. Thank you, Gigi Ryder. Richard.
I think just adding to what you said earlier, what we do on this channel is we do our best to apply objectivism. And that's what we're doing to the situation in Israel, for example. We're applying it to all of the talking points that we raise. I think, and the argument that I don't know where to go first in terms of pulling this apart. There are so many reasons that people could have the wrong reasons for supporting Israel. They could be shallow reasons. They could be ill thought through reasons. Sometimes people don't seem to care what the reason is, so long as they're on the right team. But that is such a problem. I mean, you don't want to support Israel just because you like the color of their flag, say, because it goes with the color of your eyes, and wearing a keffiyeh is a big faff. That would be a super shallow reason. You don't want to support Israel because, say, for example, you think the IDF is a really good army that fights really well, it rescues the hostages really well, whereas the bozos on the other side are likely to hold the rocket the wrong way around and blow themselves up, and you're for competence. That again will be the wrong reason. The important thing is not this kind of shallow facts. You need to understand what's relevant and what's truthful and what is the essential in your support. And when we talk about objectivism, and I think this is one of the key points that people often get wrong when talking about objectivism, they start off a sentence with Ayn Rand said blah, blah, blah. Again, that is not necessarily the important fact. It's not that Ayn Rand said it, it's that Ayn Rand said it in the context of the philosophy she developed, which was objectivism, which is demonstrably true, and you can validate it and link it all to reality and prove that it's true. Whether she liked this kind of music or that kind of book is irrelevant. And whether she was Jewish is irrelevant, quite honestly, which is another argument you often hear, particularly in relation to this channel, that we only support Israel because Ayn Rand was Jewish. Again, load of old horse manure.
Again, yes, we're talking about Israel, but Israel, as I said earlier on, is just a concrete. As long as you are applying rational thinking, it doesn't matter what you're talking about, because your mind and your knowledge is going to be engaged and focus on reality using the correct method, the logical method, which allows you to integrate all sorts of facts. So it doesn't matter if you're talking about gardening or sailing or Israel conflict. As long as you look at things from a rational point of view, the principles stand, self-defense stands, the protection of individual stands. So, as again, Israel is just a concrete. But I would like to focus on another so-called defense of Israel. The argument goes, well, we should be on the side of Israel because Israel is the most advanced and rich country in the Middle East. Again, super context drop. Why are they advanced and rich? Because they are the freer country. We know, just look at North and South Korea. What's the difference between the two of them? One is a communist dictatorship. The other one is a fairly free country. And over again, we're seeing the freedom and the allowing people to look after themselves and produce, and not stopping them or forcing them to produce for whatever the leader of the country says, is the way to create prosperity, is the way to enrich people, to get rid of poverty. And that's ultimately the moral point, the moral support for capitalism. Capitalism is to be pushed, is the result of a moral and rational thinking applied. Capitalism necessarily follows if you follow a rational way, rational thinking. And the fact that Israel, again, is the only country in the Middle East that has a freedom built in its own constitution against the theocracy that surrounds it, allows it to be the successful place that it is. So it's not successful because it's Jewish. It's not successful because there is this covenant with God that gave them the land. Crap. It's successful because it's free.
Or because it stole from its neighbors. And Israel's success is not as a result of conquest that now the Palestinians or anyone else have a right to come and avenge. As you pointed out, I mean, Israel, in the span of 80-something years, turned desert into one of the top, 8 or 10 innovative, prosperous countries in man's history. And it's freedom, it's innovation, and it's all what you mentioned, which made that possible.
Yaron Brook has this great talk, Anti-Capitalism and Anti-Semitism, and I recommend people look it up and watch it. But this argument reminds me of it. Jonathan, you talk about the argument of they're successful because they stole, and this is generally a left-wing argument. Is the rich are rich because they stole from the poor, which is something I never understood, like the mathematics of it. Jonathan, you're a finance guy. I don't know how maybe you can explain to me how one can get rich from stealing from the poor. But anyway, yeah, left-wing ideas, reason is not a factor in arriving at them. Thanks again, Gigi Ryder. So Gigi Ryder says, some Western reasons are A, Jews owned land, bought land, developed uninhabitable land, B, self-determination of nations, C, huge Sharia state created in British Palestine, 1921, aka Jordan. So with C, was it ever a Sharia state? I mean, I'm not sure that's correct, but feel free to correct me on that. Self-determination of nations is a problematic one, because what exactly does that mean? I mean, this is an argument often given for the creation of a Palestinian state. They have a right to a state. They have a right to self-determination. If their self-determination leads to a jihadist, Islamic totalitarian theocracy that exists only to wipe out the country next to it, then who are you to tell them how to live their life? So yeah.
And I also just jump in, but like a state that sacrifices everyone's life with that you have to dress a certain way, that you can't only practice only one religion. That's not a legitimate state, in my opinion, at least. That's a state in name only.
Yeah, it's a gang ruling an area, just like you can have in any given neighborhood. But when it's a country, it's somehow okay. Thank you, PC, for the super chat. PC says, if Egypt was invading Gaza, how many would be angry? I think we can get an indication of what the answer to that is from when we hear about Gaza being an open-air prison, and the reference is to Israel making it an open-air prison because they don't let people into Israel from Gaza, which, by the way, is not exactly true. There were people working in Israel from Gaza, and we saw how that turned out. But yeah, Egypt doesn't let people in, and you don't hear about any complaints about a blockade by Egypt or an open-air prison caused by Egypt. So I think we know the answer to that. Richard, do you want to move on to the next, or do you have anything to add on this? Do you want?
Well, just in terms of the religion side of it, I'm just thinking about the Bible says argument. The Bible is not evidence. And when people put up the Bible, it would go, Ayn Rand says, and the Bible says. Well, no, the problem with comparing those two things is that Ayn Rand didn't provide a load of arbitrary statements and a load of text which contradicts itself repeatedly, and chooses to evade those contradictions, as the Bible does endlessly. And of course, the arbitrary statement most prominent in the Bible is, of course, the existence of God itself. It's a total arbitrary statement. The onus of proof is on the person that asserts it, and there's no proof whatsoever. So the Bible says loses me at the next word, to be honest, in an argument related to anything. And it applies in this case as well.
Well, what about Jews were there 2,000 years ago? They were there, they were kicked out, and now they want to come back, or they're back. Basically, they're back to their homeland. And I think this is an argument that kind of is more. I think it's definitely actually more prevalent than the argument from God. And yeah, it's problematic as well.
Well, and what is that argument?
Someone was there 2,000 years ago, but it wasn't you. It wasn't even your dad or your grandfather. Somebody might have been there, but some Jews might have been there, but it wasn't you. Sorry, I didn't mean to.
And what's that argument based on? Is it based on the geography, or is it based on the tradition? Because if it's based on the tradition of somebody, then there's all sorts of traditions that you should ditch. We've ditched cannibalism as a tradition. We've ditched sacrificing your children to the gods as a tradition in terms of humanity, depending on which part of the globe you're talking about and when, and probably most of it. So what is the argument? Is the argument it should be a continuous, broken line, and everybody should be kept on the territory they're in, and all of their, descendants should be forced to remain on that territory? No, because that goes against the argument that Jonathan was making earlier, which is you don't have to live in Israel. You can choose to live in any of the free countries in the world. You've got the choice to live wherever, in countries that reflect your values and therefore that give you the best chance of life. That's what anybody with a rational outlook should do.
And the argument about people were there before, well, first of all, you need somebody to define which people and where. And that kind of decision who's been made by, it can only be made by God or some dictator that established, these people belong to my tribe, those people are outsiders, or this piece of land is mine, and therefore start a war. And that's why it's a circular argument. The Palestinian can argue the same thing, Israeli can argue the same thing, but ultimately they're both wrong if they go down the route. There is a rational way to establish what's moral and what's legitimate when you create a state, and that comes from observing reality and using rationality as your guide. So the argument, although it's very sounds very complex and takes into account history and all this kind of stuff, it's just bogus. It's based on an arbitrary delineation of this is my tribe, that's your tribe, this is my land, that's your land, and ultimately it's totally invalid.
In Israel, I mean, Razi, you grew up there. Israel, to my knowledge, is open. People go and live there, certainly Americans, all the time. They go, they rent apartments there, they buy homes there, they invest there, they work there. And, it's like Israel is open to peace-loving, rational, modern individuals, families, but not to theocratic Islamists whose version of a state or existence revolves around killing Jews. It's not open to that and shouldn't be.
And to whoever says that's not true, well, just look at the victims of October the 7th. People from at least 27 different countries were either killed or taken as hostages. So that goes to show how open and how people want to be in Israel, because it's the place where you can actually live a free life.
Yeah, by the way, Jonathan, as you mentioned, I did grow up in Israel, which is one of the arguments I hear about why we're covering Israel all the time. Tomorrow, when we talk about Ukraine, I think I'm not sure about this. I think I'm 1/16 Ukrainian, so I guess that argument can be used tomorrow as well. And but yeah, that is not the reason. There's actually, I wanted to go back a little bit to the religious argument, because I mentioned sometimes here that I have a podcast in Hebrew with a friend, Yaldei Midrachov. To those of you who speak Hebrew can look it up and find it. And we interviewed somebody who is a student of the Rabbi Meir Kahane, the famous Jewish nationalist, Jewish supremacist, really not a person I would interview again, but I saw in that interview, when I challenged him on his despicable views, that much like you see when you put a microphone in front of a student in Columbia University and ask why they're there, he wouldn't answer the question. Now he's older and a bit more eloquent, so he answered whatever question he chose to answer rather than the one I asked. But yeah, the arguments that aren't based on reason, based on actual observation of reality, often die off quickly. And this is why we're doing this episode. This is why we talk about such arguments causing damage, because if you want the world to see what is going on in Israel, why this is a problem, why you should clearly support Israel, you don't need to go 2,000 years back. You don't need to go to any imaginary beings. You don't even need to go back to October 7th. You need to go to any single day. You need to look at Palestinians. You need to actually listen to Palestinians. The pro-Palestinian side, they don't talk to Palestinians. They don't hear what they actually say. You need to listen to them. You need to see who is on the other side. I've often said on this channel, the reason this is the clearest issue to judge is not because of Israel. Israel is a relatively free country, but it's not the only one. It is because of Israel's enemy. It's because of the Palestinian people, because of Palestinian society and Palestinian culture and how dedicated it is to nothing other than the murder of Jews, dedicated to the extent that they don't care about how they raise their children. They don't care about not having, sufficient like means to live, even though they pretend to care about it when a Western camera is around, but they don't care about it when for decades Hamas puts all the resources into building tunnels. And this is what makes this the clearest issue to judge. And this is why if you don't make those arguments and you make arguments that are not based in any fact, you are in effect helping the other side. Richard.
Yeah, and in relation to some of the comments that we get on this channel, and under many of the videos, some of the positive comments that point out, for example, this is an oasis of rational thinking, or this, I like your common sense take, and how the points are clear and logical. Well, none of that is by chance, and nor is our support of Israel by chance. It's all linked together. And this is the point. You can't cherry pick your attitude in one particular circumstance and then take the opposite attitude in another circumstance. This is the whole point of objectivism. This is a whole philosophy that's all linked together. So it goes sideways and it goes up and down. You integrate sideways with everything else so you can compare with other examples, and you go up and down, and you go right back down to the root, to your premises, the premises you built the argument on in the first place. That's the way of understanding what you think and why you think it, and presenting it clearly comes as a corollary of that. And that's where the support from Israel comes, because it starts with the premise of individual rights and who is supporting the individual rights, and the point that who initiated force and against those individual rights. And then once you can see those clear points, you can see clearly that it's Israel that merits the support from a moral point of view.
And that's why if you accept any of the points we've been criticizing here, you effectively integrate that point in your knowledge. Your hierarchy of knowledge effectively gets damaged by inserting something which is not reflecting reality. And that's what will ultimately screw up your thinking, because it's like building a house and suddenly you're replacing a few bricks with foam. The thing will collapse eventually, because you have to make sure that what you accept as knowledge is something that can be integrated, it doesn't contradict the rest of your knowledge. And that's ultimately why being rational takes a bit of effort. You have to focus, you have to engage with reality. And ultimately, if you realize that what you assume was right is not matching what reality tells you, well, then perhaps you should check your premises, because perhaps you were wrong. Actually, you were wrong, because as objectivists, we know that the ultimate arbiter of any argument is reality.
Jonathan, yeah, do you want to add something on that? Because I was gonna, I was gonna say, one of the arguments that kind of bothers me the most is the IDF is the most moral army in the world argument. And that's because what is meant by morality here? It's not the IDF is the most moral army in the world because it's fighting against savages. It's when it doesn't fight that is what that statement refers to as moral. It's when it sacrifices its own soldiers. It sacrifices its citizens in the form of not doing what needs to be done to protect them. And those sacrifices are made to supposedly protect civilian lives, or actually to protect civilian lives on the enemy's side. And that is moral according to a certain moral code, and that moral code is what I think is leading to Israel's destruction. So and this is an argument. This is the tagline. The IDF is the world's most moral army is one we hear from Israeli spokespeople all the time. Your thoughts on that?
Well, the Israeli army, from what I see, and Israel as a country, from what I've observed, tends to respect life. They respect human life. I don't see the IDF as a military force that goes down there and just mows down people whole cloth. I mean, we saw that with the rescue operation of the 4 hostages. They trained for it for weeks. They knew exactly where everything was so that they didn't have to use all this excessive force. They could have missiled the whole area and, they could have really done a lot more damage. They still could. I mean, Israel's military force is so ginormous compared to the Palestinians that there could be, a tremendous death. But Israel tends to value human life. Razi, to your point, I think it's difficult because it's a positive, I think, that they value human life, but it's a negative, as you alluded to, that they sacrifice the lives of their own citizens, the ones that they're supposed to protect, as against the Palestinians, exactly those who are seeking to kill them and do them harm.
Yeah, by the way, I think that the fact that they value human life so much is part of the reason. Other errors that they make because of that is, this willingness to negotiate with terrorists when it comes to wanting to bring back the hostages. But the example you gave is actually the rescue operation for those 4 hostages was, in terms of the firepower used, was one of the more kind of heavy-handed operations, which I loved. In part because it achieved its goal, but in part because the approach in terms of the civilian population in Gaza was what I think is the morally right one, which is, civilians were terrified. There were bombs flying everywhere. There were shooting. There's videos of them videoing themselves running scared. And I look at that and I think that is moral. That is great. That's not an unfortunate side effect of an operation to rescue. Those are people who may or may not have known that there's hostages nearby, and certainly would not tell Israel, tell the IDF that that's where the hostages are if they know. Those are people who celebrated on those streets. On October 7th. So I think the approach, valuing human life is a great thing, but part of human life is the living human has free will, and you should consider what they do with that will. And if they choose to be murderous savages, then their life is a value when taken. Richard.
Yeah, I mean, whatever you're defending, you should defend it for the right reasons, and you should understand what they are. I mean, it's the same with capitalism, for example. The fact that you benefit from your own effort, you should benefit from your own effort, and that is an argument for supporting capitalism. You shouldn't undermine your argument for capitalism by saying, yes, but wouldn't it be lovely if, and all those kind of things. You shouldn't say that, and you shouldn't defend what Israel is doing and then say, but they should try and protect Palestinians more, because again, you're undermining the clarity of the moral argument, which is that Israel needs to defeat the enemy as soon as possible in order to make sure that there can be a peace that lasts, but a peace that is based on individual rights for the future. And that would include for Palestinians who choose to give up the ideology they subscribe to and recognize the individual rights as the core of their thinking. So when it comes to the most moral army in the world, we see how the endless effort to be the supposed moral army of the world from an altruistic perspective means that the IDF warn buildings and the occupants of buildings that they're about to bomb it, allowing terrorists to escape. They sometimes don't initiate a strike on a given terrorist target because they're concerned, of what they can see on the footage, civilians being close by, for example, and therefore lose the opportunity to terminate the terrorist, which is going to which ends up prolonging the war for everyone. So that is not moral, right. Despite people's endless evasion of that fact.
The most moral army is an example of what Ayn Rand called frozen abstraction. Moral here actually stands for altruistic. And altruism, we know, is the putting somebody else in front of your needs, in front of or what you need to do. And again, as Razi was saying earlier on, look at reality and ask yourself why. So why should Israel sacrifice his own people to spare civilian lives? Why should a soldier die in order to protect the life of a terrorist or a hostage taker? And this is the fundamental wrong in fighting a war with an altruistic point of view. You try to minimize the enemy's losses and you don't care about your own casualties. That's totally screwed up. And only morality based on a religious basis can come up with something so horrendous and so anti-life. Again, look at the two entities, Israel and Palestine, and then think about the attack on October 7 at the Nova Festival. Israel, on the Israeli side, you have a group of people enjoying life, being happy, dancing, listening to music. And on the other side, you got a bunch of savages that come over and kill and butcher 1,200 people and take 251 hostages. Now, what are the premises here? What's behind the behavior? The Israeli love for life versus the love for death on the other side.
Yeah, I'm glad you point that up. Morals kind of floating out there. I think that's part of what makes objectivism unique, in our analysis of this event pretty unique, is our understanding of what morality really is, especially in times of war, including so-called innocent Palestinian bystanders.
Yeah, Marco, you mentioned altruism is putting others above yourself, and the way the IDF does it is altruism on steroids, because it's not just others, it's not any random, you're giving money to some homeless person on the street and moving on with your life. It's specifically sacrificing lives in for those who want you to die. So it's the worst form of altruism, I think, that we see anywhere today. And another argument that we hear that kind of is kind of connected to this is when Israeli spokespeople are interviewed, they'll say things like and asked about civilian casualties, they say, well, it's very unfortunate that civilians die in war. We do whatever we can to avoid it, and so on, rather than saying, look, the Palestinians started this war. The Palestinians are continuing this war. They're continuing to fight. And when you start a war, this is a consequence of that. So this is not an issue that it should not be unfortunate in the way Israel presents it. What's unfortunate is that they started a war and they're still fighting it. And as long as they do, them losing is fortunate, is good. Richard.
Yeah. Well, I was just going to go on to say, and some of the other arguments you hear are things like, my country's at war, therefore I should support it. Well, if you're Russian, should you support the Russian war against Ukraine on that basis? If you're in 1940s Germany, should you support the Nazis because your country's at war? No. You might have very good reasons to detest the country of your birth. Ayn Rand did, for example. She detested the Soviet Union and moved to the United States and recognized the values of the United States represented her and her thinking far, far better, and detested the values that the Soviet Union represented. So simply because you're born in a place and simply because that country is at war is not a reason to support it. And so if you are supporting Israel for that reason, you need to look at the values of Israel. That's the reason to support it. Those are the reasons to get behind it. And those are the reasons to argue for, because then that principle applies across the map. And therefore, you know exactly who to support in any given conflict.
And going back to the civilian victims, well, that again, if you want to talk objectivism, let's talk about the principle of justice. The action you take will have a consequence. And the consequence of somebody who goes around raping and killing and taking hostages is going to be a retaliation. It's going to be death. caused by their own actions. Again, Ayn Rand said that if you do something and you ignore reality, reality will swing back at you. And this is an example. If you attack somebody, the state that retaliates because it's been attacked has got every right to cause as many deaths that it needs to do in order to remove the threat. And in this case, the Gazans, Hamas, is responsible for every single death in this situation because they started it.
Jonathan?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you're spot on that the Palestinians, they started the war. They are responsible, and they are responsible for perpetuating it, keeping it going. Of all the arguments that those who are advocates of Israel or purported advocates of Israel make, I think the Israel's respect for supposedly innocent Palestinian lives is, to me, the most frustrating, because survey the Palestinians, they support Hamas overwhelmingly. And they're the ones, Hamas exists. Dr. Brooke always says, and I think it's true in this case, we get the politicians we deserve. Hamas exists because the people want Hamas. They keep Hamas in power, intellectual, financial support for Hamas. This whole past couple of weeks, we covered how the hostages are being held in, seemingly upper, well-to-do Palestinian homes. And so, I don't know if they should be targeted, but I hate that the proponents of Israel advocate for Israel because they don't target civilians, because maybe they should.
Yeah, I was going to say something about that, but Apollo Zeus, by the way, for those who didn't notice earlier, gifted a YouTube membership. And when you gift a YouTube membership, you don't actually choose who it goes to. The algorithm chooses, and the algorithm chose Apollo Zeus, which was the first time I've seen that. But that's nice. And thank you, Apollo Zeus, for the super chat. On a somewhat less positive note, Apollo Zeus asks, on the ground, for example, London, has there been any improvement regarding anti-Semitism? PC replied, nope. Paul replied, they still have the evil protests every Saturday. Yeah, I've been away for about a month, but I haven't seen much improvement. Richard, Marco, maybe you can you also kind of travel around London a bit more than I do, so maybe you have more info.
Well, anti-Semitism is not a weather event. People cause it. It's the idea that people hold that cause anti-Semitism. And if the people are still here, clearly the ideas are still there. So I wouldn't expect any sudden, awakening of people's mind, and therefore a realization that they are being anti-Semitic and moving towards a rational way of thinking. So I don't expect things to change in the short term.
I think the only thing that may make things change in the short term, but not necessarily for the better, and quite arguably for the worse, is the fact we're obviously in an election period here in the UK. And come the 4th of July and the 5th of July, the day after the election, we'll have a new government, most likely. And then what's currently on the streets every Saturday might be more reflected in the policies of the government that takes office at that point. So looking a bit bleak at the moment, to say the least. And of course, many people are choosing to keep their powder dry, even those on the worst side of the arguments, until they get over that line of that election. So it's going to be interesting times, and not necessarily good ones, but we'll keep commenting on them on this channel and letting you know the real picture, no matter how distasteful it is.
Jonathan, I don't know what the situation is in Chicago, but yeah, in America, we covered for 2 weeks pretty much straight the campus intifada. How is the situation in the US in terms of protests, in terms of anti-Semitism?
I haven't noticed much change, but what worries me is kind of was moving forward was the genesis of this whole episode today, was that Israel has such few good defenders that it reminds me kind of very much of like the Republicans maybe 10 years ago were such terrible defenders of capitalism that capitalism, at least in the States, has been totally left behind. That's kind of my fear with Israel now, is that Israel does have some support here in the States and even some political support, maybe not among the young people we profiled, but it's built on such shaky ground, as you say, kind of argument from mysticism or tradition or religion or history. It's like that's what defenders of Israel are grounded in. So that's what worries me now, moving even a year, 3 years, 5 years out, is that there is no moral defense. I think we're among the few that I'm aware of making moral, rational, truly moral arguments for why Israel not only needs to exist, but to completely eradicate the enemy immediately. And because there's so few, that gives me some pause and some concern.
Which is all the more reason why anybody who likes and values what we do should support our work so we can keep doing what we're doing, keep reaching more and more people. And other reasons to become a member are the benefits you get, like several hours every week of additional exclusive content, and you get access to our WhatsApp groups where I don't even know how many there are, even though I started all of them and kind of run all of them, but it's something like at least 15, right? Maybe more, where there are conversations going on, and including we're involved in those as well. So consider becoming a member. There's a link in the chat. Thank you, Gigi Ryder, for the super chat. Gigi Ryder says, Arab war on Yehuda continues since at least 1920. Yeah, I mean, Arabs were killing Jews in in the British Mandate of Palestine, and then when Israel was formed, from day one, they were killing Jews, and of course, Europeans also have a history of killing Jews and supporting those who kill Jews, so it's not really that uncharacteristic, the support for the Palestinians and for Hamas, but it is just now packaged differently, but we know what it is, and we're going to continue fighting against it, pointing out what it is and what the problems are with it, but also pointing out the problems with those who say they defend Israel, but do so in a way that unfortunately often sounds very much like the way the other side defends their views. Any parting thoughts, Richard?
Well, I guess it goes back to it's not tribalism. It's got to be reason, and it's not emotion. Emotion's one of those we haven't particularly touched on in this episode, but that's one of the things that drives a lot of people is an emotional response to images or pictures or what they're seeing related to the conflict, and one way or the other. And that again is having emotions lead you without understanding the values they're based on is again going to misguide you very quickly. So it's making sure that you know what you think and you know what your principles are. It's principles, people. That's the bottom line.
Yeah, and bear in mind that a defeat of Israel is actually a rebellion against reality. It's a defeat of rational thinking, defeat of morality, and ultimate defeat of civilization. It literally boils down to a matter of morality. If you are against Israel, you are against morality, you are against reality.
Jonathan?
And read what Ayn Rand said and wrote about Israel. Google her Phil Donahue comments, read her comments from the Ford Hall Forum during Q&A sessions. It's all published, and avail yourself to some of her perspective on these issues, which, in many cases seems as if they haven't even changed since the 1970s and 80s. They've gotten much, much worse.
You know what? I will follow that advice right now. And actually, I know I do this often and read what Ayn Rand said, but I think if we're debunking the worst pro-Israel arguments, it makes sense to wrap this episode up with the best. So Ayn Rand, this is in 1973, very much relevant now. The question was, What should the United States do about the Arab-Israeli war? This was the Yom Kippur War, and this was her answer in the Ford Hall Forum. Give all help possible to Israel. Consider what is at stake. It is not the moral duty of any country to send men to die helping another country. The help Israel needs is technology and military weapons, and they need them desperately. Why should we help Israel? Israel is fighting not just the Arabs, but Soviet Russia, who is sending the Arabs armaments. Russia is after control of the Mediterranean and oil. By the way, that's the first paragraph. I'll read the second one, but first I will let people know that tomorrow's episode of the Daily Objective with Nikos and myself will be about why Israel and Ukraine are essentially the same war, and you should support both. But you know, this was true. This was true. How many years is this? 50 plus years ago, and it's still true today. And then she continues. Further, why are the Arabs against Israel? This is the main reason I support Israel. The Arabs are one of the least developed cultures. They are still practically nomads. Their culture is primitive, and they resent Israel because it's the sole beachhead of modern science and civilization on their continent. When you have civilized men fighting savages, you support the civilized men no matter who they are. Israel is a mixed economy inclined towards socialism, but when it comes to the power of the mind, the development of industry in that wasted desert continent versus savages who don't want to use their mind, then if one cares about the future of civilization, don't wait for the government to do something. Give whatever you can. This is the first time I've contributed to a public cause, helping Israel in an emergency. So yeah, that answers the question we had at the beginning of the episode. That's stated as well as possible, and yeah, I think that's a great way to end this episode. Just before we go, Jonathan, where can people find more from you?
Capitalistpig.com, and my book about investments is called Price is Primary. It's at Amazon.
Marco, Richard?
Check out the Briefly Objective. You can see down below it says for shorter content and a link to it where you find edited videos of all the stuff on this channel together with images for your social media feed for your concise arguments.
I'm Razi Ginzberg on X, and we will be back here tomorrow with the Daily Objective and the reality show. Thanks, everybody, and we'll see you tomorrow.